Today we're going to be tackling atomic habits. I'm excited to explore this with you because, let's be real, we've all got habits we want to change. So we're breaking down this popular book.
Atomic Habits really hits on those everyday behaviors that, believe it or not, shape who we become over time.
Okay, so right off the bat, the author throws out this idea of habits being like compound interest for self-improvement. I'm intrigued, but also finance metaphors before coffee. Help me out here.
It's a powerful comparison, though. We think of compound interest growing our money, but the same principle applies to habits. Tiny actions repeated consistently build upon themselves. Imagine that those seemingly insignificant daily choices, whether it's saving a few dollars or skipping dessert, accumulate and shape our future selves over 10, 20 years. It's about those small wins that add up to something remarkable.
So it's not about those drastic overnight transformations we see on reality TV, but rather setting up a system for long-term success.
Exactly. Atomic Habits shifts the focus from chasing a specific goal to building a sustainable system that naturally leads to those outcomes. Think about it. If you want to be a writer, the goal might be to finish a novel, but the system is writing every day. If you want to be healthier, the goal might be to lose weight, but the system is consistently making healthy food choices and moving your body.
This reminds me of when I tried to learn Spanish. My goal was fluency, but I didn't have a system. I'd do a lesson here and there, but it wasn't consistent. No wonder it didn't stick.
And that's where Atomic Habits shines, providing a practical framework for building those systems. The book dives deep into how our actions reinforce our beliefs about ourselves, creating a powerful feedback loop.
So the book argues that habits actually shape our identity, and our identity shapes our habits. Is this where that fake it till you make it idea comes from?
Yeah, it's a bit more nuanced than that. But you're on the right track. It's not about pretending, but rather as you consistently act in a certain way, you start to see yourself differently. Imagine someone who incorporates exercise into their identity. They don't have to convince themselves to work out. It's simply part of who they are.
So someone who sees themselves as a runner is more likely to lace up their shoes and hit the pavement even when motivation is low, because it aligns with their self-image.
Precisely. And this applies to all areas of life. If you want to be a morning person, start acting like one. Set your alarm earlier, make your bed, have a quiet ritual to start your day. Eventually, those actions become part of your identity, and waking up early becomes effortless.
This is starting to make a lot of sense. Now, to actually form these habits, the book talks about the habit loop. Can you break that down for us?
Absolutely. The habit loop is a four-stage cycle. Cue, craving, response, and reward. It all starts with a cue, a piece of information that predicts a reward. It could be anything from seeing a notification on your phone to the smell of freshly baked cookies. That cue triggers a craving, the motivational force behind every habit. Remember, it's not the cookie itself you crave, but the feeling of satisfaction or indulgence you associate with it.
Ah, so that explains my late-night ice cream raids. It's not really the ice cream I crave, but that sense of comfort and reward after a long day.
Exactly. That craving then leads to a response, the actual habit you perform, like eating the ice cream. Finally, you get the reward, that pleasurable taste or sense of satisfaction, which reinforces the entire loop.
So we've got this loop playing out in our brains all the time, driving both our good and bad habits. How do we actually change those ingrained behaviors? The book introduces the 4 laws of behavior change. What's the secret sauce?
These laws provide a practical framework for manipulating the stages of the habit loop. The first law tied to the cue stage is make it obvious. This isn't just about sticky notes, though those can help. It's about being aware of the cues that trigger your habits, both good and bad. For example, let's say you want to drink more water. Instead of relying on feeling thirsty, make it obvious by keeping a full water bottle on your desk at all times. The visual cue serves as a constant reminder.
That makes sense. I've also heard of people using visual cues to break bad habits, like putting a picture of their goal weight on the fridge to curb unhealthy snacking.
Exactly. By recognizing those triggers and making them more obvious, you can either make it easier to engage in good habits or disrupt the cues associated with bad ones.
So we've made the cue obvious. What's the next step in this habit-building recipe?
The second law addressing the craving stage is make it attractive. This taps into the power of our social circles and how they shape our desires. We're more likely to adopt habits that are praised and approved by those around us. If you want to exercise more, join a running club, or find a workout buddy who shares your goals.
That's like positive peer pressure. If everyone around me is hitting the gym and eating healthy, I'm more likely to get on board too.
You got it. It's about leveraging those social influences to make the habit more appealing. Now, are you ready for law number 3?
Hit me with it.
The third law is all about reducing friction and making the habit easy. Make it easy is the mantra here. If you want to read more, keep a book on your nightstand. If you want to cook healthy meals, prep your ingredients on the weekend. By removing obstacles, you make the desired behavior the path of least resistance.
I'm starting to see a pattern here. It's all about setting yourself up for success by making the good habits easy and the bad habits harder.
You're catching on quickly. Now, the final law addressing the reward stage is make it satisfying. This taps into our brain's reward system. We're more likely to repeat a behavior when the experience is enjoyable. This doesn't have to be anything extravagant. It could be as simple as using a habit tracker to visualize your progress, giving you a sense of accomplishment and motivating you to keep going.
It's like rewarding yourself with a virtual high five for every day you stick to your habit. But what about those habits where the reward is delayed, like saving for retirement or working towards a long-term goal?
That's where things get tricky. But Atomic Habits has some clever solutions for those too. We'll dive into those in just a bit. You bring up a great point. It's much easier to stick with a habit when you get that immediate gratification, that dopamine hit. But what about those long-term goals where the reward feels so far off?
Exactly. Like, how do I stay motivated to save for retirement when the payoff is decades away?
Atomic Habits suggests we find ways to make those future rewards feel more tangible and immediate. One technique is to create a visual representation of your progress. For example, you could have a chart that tracks your savings, where you get to color in a section for every milestone you reach.
So it's like a grown-up sticker chart.
Yeah.
But for retirement planning, I kind of love it. Seeing that visual progress can be really motivating, even if the actual reward is years down the line.
Exactly. It taps into that desire for immediate gratification. The book also emphasizes the power of celebrating those small wins along the way. Instead of waiting until you reach the final goal, acknowledge and appreciate each step you take towards it. This helps to keep the momentum going.
So it's like giving yourself permission to enjoy the journey, not just the destination.
Precisely. Now remember those 4 laws we discussed earlier. They're not just for building good habits, they can also be inverted to break bad ones.
It's like flipping the script on those negative behaviors. So if I'm trying to curb my social media addiction, I could make it less obvious by removing those tempting app icons from my home screen.
That's a great start. You could also make it less attractive by turning off notifications or setting time limits. And to make it harder, you could log out of your accounts or even temporarily delete the apps.
And to make the experience less satisfying, I could remind myself of how much time I'm wasting scrolling, or even replace that time with a more fulfilling activity.
Now you're thinking like a habit master. It's all about understanding those triggers and using these strategies to your advantage. But remember, lasting behavior change isn't just about tweaking our environment or manipulating our reward systems. It goes deeper than that, right?
You're totally right. The book emphasizes this concept of identity as being crucial for lasting change. Can you unpack that a bit more?
It's a central theme of Atomic Habits. The idea is that true transformation isn't about achieving a specific goal, but becoming the kind of person who achieves those goals naturally. It's about aligning your actions with your desired identity.
So instead of saying, I want to write a book, I should say, I am a writer. Or instead of, I want to run a marathon, I should say, I am a runner.
Exactly. When your actions are consistent with your self-image, motivation becomes almost effortless. You're not forcing yourself to do something you don't enjoy. You're simply living in accordance with your self-identity.
But what if I'm struggling to embrace that new identity? What if those old habits and beliefs are holding me back?
That's where Atomic Habits offers some practical tools. One of them is the 2-minute rule.
I'm all ears. Tell me more about this 2-minute rule.
The idea is to break down any new habit into a ridiculously easy 2-minute version. So write every day becomes write 1 sentence. Meditate for 20 minutes becomes sit in silence for 2 minutes.
That's brilliant. It removes all those mental barriers we build up. Sometimes just getting started is the hardest part.
Exactly. The goal is to build momentum, to prove to yourself that you can do it. And once you've mastered that 2-minute version, you can gradually increase the difficulty using a technique called habit shaping.
So start small, build consistency, and then gradually level up. That seems much more sustainable than trying to overhaul my entire life overnight.
Absolutely. Atomic Habits also highlights the power of having an accountability partner, someone who can help you stay on track and provide that extra nudge when motivation dips.
Like a workout buddy or a writing group.
Exactly. Having that shared commitment and support can make a huge difference. Now, here's a question for you. Do you think there are right habits for everyone? Or does it vary based on individual personality and goals?
That's a great question. It makes me think of those personality quizzes that tell you what kind of workout or diet is best for your type. Is it really that individualized?
That's where things get interesting. Atomic Habits argues that we should focus on habits that align with our natural abilities and predispositions. It's easier to be successful when you're playing a game where the odds are in your favor. The book uses the fascinating story of the Polgar sisters as an example.
Oh, those chess prodigies. Their story is incredible. They were practically raised on chess, weren't they?
Exactly. Their father believed that talent could be cultivated through deliberate practice, and he created an environment where chess was their entire world. All three sisters went on to become chess grandmasters.
So was it purely their upbringing that led to their success? Or was there some innate talent at play too?
That's the nature versus nurture debate, and it's a complex one. While the Polgar sisters' environment clearly played a significant role, there were likely some genetic predispositions at work as well. But the takeaway for us is that we should play to our strengths, exploring activities that we find naturally enjoyable and engaging.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where passion and talent intersect. I love that. But even with the right habits, staying motivated over the long haul can be tough. How do we keep the momentum going, especially when boredom sets in?
That's where Atomic Habits introduces the Goldilocks rule. Remember that story? Not too hot, not too cold, just right. Well, this rule states that we experience peak motivation when working on tasks that are right on the edge of our current abilities.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between challenge and skill, where it's not too easy that we get bored, but not so difficult that we get discouraged.
You nailed it. And here's the thing, as we master a skill, that sweet spot shifts. We need to constantly challenge ourselves to stay engaged. It's like leveling up in a video game.
I'm starting to see a theme here. It's all about finding those strategies that keep us motivated and engaged in the long run. Are there any other tips Atomic Habits offers for keeping things fresh?
The book talks about the power of variable rewards. It's this idea that introducing an element of surprise and unpredictability can boost our motivation because it taps into our natural desire for novelty.
Ooh, that's interesting. So instead of the same old routine, we shake things up a bit.
Exactly. Think about it. You're more likely to stick with a workout routine if there's an element of surprise, like a new playlist or a different route to run. The same applies to any habit.
So it's like adding a little spice to our routines to keep things interesting. I like it. But with all these strategies and techniques swirling around, it's a lot to keep track of. How do we ensure we're actually making progress?
That's where reflection and refinement come in. Atomic Habits stresses the importance of regularly reviewing your systems, tracking your progress, and making adjustments as needed. It's a continuous process of experimentation and learning.
So it's not about setting it and forgetting it, but rather being adaptable and fine-tuning our approach based on what's working and what's not.
Precisely. It's about being your own habit scientist, constantly tweaking and optimizing to find what works best for you. Now, there's one more intriguing point I want to discuss. Atomic Habits suggest that sometimes even our positive beliefs can hinder our growth.
Wait, how is that possible? Isn't a strong sense of self a good thing?
It can be, but here's the paradox. The more strongly we identify with a particular skill or trait, the more resistant we become to acknowledging any weaknesses in that area.
So it's like getting stuck in a fixed mindset, believing that our abilities are set in stone rather than malleable.
Exactly. The author encourages us to view our identities as fluid and evolving, open to continuous refinement and expansion. It's about embracing a growth mindset, being open to learning and evolving, even if it means challenging our preconceived notions about ourselves.
That's so powerful. It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress. But with all this amazing information from Atomic Habits, where do we even begin? How do we translate all of this knowledge into action?
It can feel overwhelming, right? But Atomic Habits offers a simple starting point. Focus on your desired identity. Ask yourself, what kind of person do I want to be? Once you have a clear vision of that ideal self, start building habits that align with that identity.
So if I want to be a writer, I should start by making writing a regular habit, even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
Exactly. By consistently acting like a writer, you start to internalize that identity, and as your self-image shifts, it becomes easier to stick to the habits that support that new identity. It's about aligning your actions with your aspirations.
That makes sense. It's like building momentum. The more I write, the more I see myself as a writer, which makes me want to write even more.
That's the power of the feedback loop in action. And remember, Atomic Habits is all about those small changes compounding over time. It's like the British cycling team's philosophy of marginal gains. They focus on making tiny 1% improvements in every aspect of their training and performance. from the aerodynamics of their bikes to the athletes' sleep and nutrition.
And they went on to dominate the world of cycling. It's amazing how those seemingly insignificant tweaks can add up to such a significant advantage.
It's a testament to the power of consistency and the cumulative effect of small positive changes. Now, something else that stood out to me in the book is the idea that our satisfaction with any reward is actually relative. Can you relate to that in your own life?
Absolutely. It makes me think of when I first started this podcast. Getting 100 downloads felt like a huge accomplishment. But as we grew, that same number barely registered. What once felt extraordinary became the new normal.
It's a perfect example of how our brains adapt to our circumstances. Atomic Habits highlights the importance of cultivating gratitude and appreciation for the progress we've made, even when things start to feel routine.
It's like we need to recalibrate our expectations and celebrate those wins, both big and small, along the way.
Exactly. Now, before we wrap up our deep dive into Atomic Habits, is there anything else that particularly resonated with you?
One thing that really struck me was the idea that self-control isn't always the most effective approach to behavior change. It seems counterintuitive. But the author argues that resisting temptation can actually backfire. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a fascinating concept, isn't it? The book suggests that instead of constantly fighting against our desires, we should focus on redesigning our environment to make good habits easier and bad habits harder.
So instead of white-knuckling my way through a restrictive diet, I should focus on creating an environment where healthy choices are the most accessible and appealing options.
Precisely. It's about setting yourself up for success by making the desired behaviors the path of least resistance.
This has been such an insightful exploration of Atomic Habits. I'm already feeling inspired to start applying some of these strategies to my own life. What would be your final takeaway for our listeners? Something for them to ponder as they continue on their own journey of self-improvement.
I would encourage everyone listening to think about this. What small habit could you start today that could have a significant impact on your life in 5 years?
That's a fantastic question to leave our listeners with. It's been a pleasure unpacking Atomic Habits with you.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to all of you listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and practical tools to start building those atomic habits that will shape your best self. If you're eager to delve deeper, we highly recommend checking out Atomic Habits. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing.